All right, good evening, good evening. Welcome to High Forest Community Church. We're excited to see you all here for a special event, which you all are aware of, which is learning and understanding the Passover Seder. So this is an event that I was able to participate in several years ago and was absolutely blown away by it. And so I presented that to the church here, and they love the idea of hosting this. So we're excited you're here because today we'll kind of learn where it came from, how it came to be what we've got today, and you'll all be able to experience the elements, taste them all, and enjoy it. So let's go ahead and get started. Passover. Now, in the Jewish people call it Pesach. So this actually celebrates the original rescue of Israel from Egypt. It was commanded by God in Leviticus 23 for them to all observe, and it's the first of the original 7 feasts that God laid out in Leviticus 23. So again, it's the first of the original spring feasts. It gets its name from the event that it celebrates. The original 3 spring feasts are Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. Now, there is a Feast of Purim that actually gets added during the days of Queen Esther, after the escapades there in Persia. There is a Feast of Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, as it's also called, or what we call Pentecost, that happens 7 weeks later after Passover. Then there are some more feasts in the fall. Now, interestingly enough, Passover is one of the 3 feasts that requires all able-bodied men to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate this in Jerusalem in person. A failure to observe this would actually result in your potential expulsion from society. So it was a very, very big deal. So let's go ahead and start the story where you typically start one, and that is at the beginning. So we are going to travel all the way back to 1446 BC. So about 3,500 years ago is when this event actually got established. This was during the reign of Amenhotep II in the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. It's a fascinating study to just go back to all this and understand what these Israelites are going through and what the times were like during the days of Amenhotep II and a couple of the subsequent people after him. But this event is located in Exodus 12. It talks about the original setup, where this came from, and why. And it's only 13 verses, so I wanted to kind of run through this with you real quick so you have a basis as to what the origin of this event is from. In Exodus 12, verse 1, "Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, 'This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you.'" So what God did here is he actually established a religious calendar. So the Jews actually have 2 calendars. You got the secular calendar, which we all use, which is the Gregorian calendar. That was established in 1582, if memory serves correct. The religious calendar is what we're seeing established here now. It is used for determining the dates of Jewish holidays. Also, for Torah readings and religious purposes. Even some civil stuff in Israel is actually based off of the religious calendar that God established here 3,500 years ago. The Jewish religious calendar is lunisolar, meaning it's based on the cycles of the moon and the sun. There's actually leap months that are inserted in certain years to keep the calendar aligned with the solar season. So where we have a leap year or a leap day every once in a while, they actually will have a leap month. Now, another important thing to understand, because we're going to be bumping into this quite a bit as we're going through the Passover Seder, is the Jewish day starts at sundown. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, and we'll actually elaborate on that a little bit more and bring what the importance of that is. Of course, our day begins at midnight. Another interesting thing, the Jewish year actually has 354 or 385 days, depending on whether it has that leap month. So we got through 2 verses. Bear with me. "Speak to all the congregation of Israel." This is God speaking to Moses. "On the 10th of this month, They are each one to take a lamb for themselves, according to the father's households, a lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them. In proportion to what each one should eat, you are to divide the lamb. So this was God's way of not having waste. Verse 5, your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old, and you may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to slaughter it at twilight. So they're to take and find a lamb here on day 10. On day 14 is when they're to slaughter it. So that's 4 days that they actually have to inspect this lamb to make sure it is perfect, that it's a worthy sacrifice for what's about to happen. And then also there, it's interesting that they're to slaughter it at twilight. We'll actually go over that in a minute because that was an interesting study there in itself. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head, its legs, along with its entrails. So whole, you kind of picture it on a steak and cooking it that way. And you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning you shall completely burn with fire. Now you shall eat it in this way, with your garment belted around your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in a hurry. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night and fatally strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the human firstborn to animals, and against all of the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will come upon you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So those 13 verses actually give us the origin. What was going on? Some of you, I'm sure most of you know the story, and we'll touch on that just a little bit because they actually go through that story during the Seder, which we'll be going through. But I wanted to give you this little bit of background so we understood where this came from. The main points, of course, is choosing a perfect lamb on the 10th of Nisan. We're going to kill it on the 14th of Nisan at twilight. We're going to apply its blood on the door frame, which is 3 spots on each side of the door and above the door. Then we're going to eat the lamb, the unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. Nothing is to be left by morning, and to be dressed to leave. So what we saw here was God explaining what to do, what was going to happen, and how to protect yourself against this terrible plague of death that was coming. Of course, this is in reference to the 10 famous plagues that we all learned about in Sunday school, which ultimately this one, the death of the firstborn, is what got Pharaoh to let the people go. So the main directions that they were to follow are listed up there on the screen, but I want to go back to that twilight. I mentioned that earlier. When I was first sitting down to start studying this, it kind of threw me off. I was like, twilight. Okay, so when we think of twilight, what do we think of? The stars are all gleaming. We think of like Charlie Brown's Christmas, where the stars are twinkling in the sky. That's not actually what twilight means. It took a little bit of digging to understand this and define this, but it means between the 2 evenings is the literal translation. And this I found even more interesting. The first evening was at sunset. So when we think of sunset, what do we think of? The sun has just gone down over the horizon. That is not the case. The first sunset is at noon. That is when the sun has reached its highest point and it actually begins its descent. That's the first sunset. The second sunset, and that's actually according to Hebrew sages and writings from the first, couple hundred years before Christ, we're writing about that. The second evening was after the actual sunset down below the horizon. 3 stars being visible was what denoted the second sunset. So when you read that as twilight, or literally between the 2 evenings, read that as dead in between those 2 evenings. So according to Josephus, in his writings in the Wars of the Jews, the Passover lamb was slayed from the 9th hour to the 11th hour, or 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that later. Gosh, got all that? That's a lot of info, sorry. Okay, so that kind of gives us the background of what it is. I kind of wanted to give you a quick history because this is 3,500 years ago. Today, it's a little bit different, which you're going to experience. And where did this come from? How did this come to be? So the early evolution kind of the Passover is obviously after Israel left Egypt. What did they do for 40 years, or 39 to be specific? They wandered through the wilderness because they disobeyed God. So this is recorded in the early book of Numbers in Exodus. But they wandered in the wilderness, but it was observed, the Passover. Now, once they finally got centralized under Joshua, and they eventually got into the land and were able to take over the land, of course, the Jerusalem temple, the temple that they would eventually worship at, was not in existence. So there was a place called Shiloh that they observed this for a while. Then it did move to Jerusalem. Then, of course, we came to the monarchy in the first temple period. Prior to that, it was kind of sporadic. We know throughout the book of Judges, the people would obey, then they would rebel. Then they would obey, then they would rebel. So there was periods where they were following it, then they wouldn't follow it. But by the time we get to the monarchy in the first temple, of course, Solomon's temple is built in 957 BC, and all sacrificial worship became centralized there at Jerusalem. There was a couple of times where we had some pretty bad kings, of course, Manasseh being one of them, but his son Josiah, when they were remodeling, they actually found a copy of the Torah, which Manasseh had tried to destroy every copy. They found it, realized how far they had fallen, and got back to the system. But as you know, they did go into the Babylonian exile. That lasted 70 years to the day. There were 2 70-year periods, too, so there you go. Take care of that on your study time. But they did not. They weren't able to observe Passover anymore, not in the way that it had gone to, where the sacrificial lamb was taken at the temple because the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So from writings, we understand that it kind of more transformed into the home. It became, the local groups of worshipers coming together or in the home. The second temple period, so after Darius freed the Jews from the Babylonian captivity when Persia took over Babylon, they got to go back home. He even gave them financial incentives to rebuild the temple and be able to start the Passover again. So at that point is when we do see in Deuteronomy 16:16 they were able to return back to that commandment of traveling back to Jerusalem and celebrating the Passover. Now, of course, all the way up to Jesus. We'll talk about that here in a minute too, but Jesus did celebrate the Passover with his disciples. That is recorded. And there's several ritualistic traditions that we're actually going to participate tonight that Jesus did partake of. That's covered in a couple of the Gospels, Luke 22 being one of them. As we know, eventually after 70 AD, Titus and his legions destroyed Jerusalem once again. The temple was destroyed just like Jesus predicted, and again, sacrifices were ended. So what they ended up doing is the rabbis kind of got together, had a powwow, and decided, okay, we're going to turn this into more of what we're going to see here today, which is more around synagogue worship, again in the family group, and very ritualistic and symbolic foods. We go kind of just beyond that point, the Mishnah, Talmud, they actually start codifying. They start coming up with more of this is how we're going to do it, kind of uniform. So we actually see the 4 cups of wine integrated at this point. The reciting of the Haggadah is put in stone, so to speak. The matzah, the maror, the haraset, karpas. The stuff that we're going to be doing tonight is exactly what was set up here after the post-temple period here, including the afikomen, which I'm probably butchering that, but that's why I'm going to say it all night, which is the hidden matzah, which we'll talk about, introduced to actually engage the children and make this more of an exciting, kind of how our kids get excited on Christmas morning is how these kids would get excited with the Passover. Of course, we have the diaspora and the local traditions. So you've got the Ashkenazi, you've got the Sephardic variations. So those are just 2 groups that what we're seeing is regions kind of start coming up with their own traditions. And that's one of the interesting things is when you start looking at how American Jews celebrate, how religious Orthodox Jews in America celebrate versus secular in Israel or religious in Israel. Everybody kind of has their own way of doing it, their own recipes for some of this stuff, so it varies quite a bit. And leading up into modern day, we kind of have two groups now. We kind of have the secular and the Orthodox Jews. As far as the secular wise goes, Passover has become a celebration of freedom and national identity. Many Israeli and even secular Jewish homes do conduct these seders. They just kind of aspect more toward the historical, more towards this is where we came from, rather than the religious adherence. But then on the flip side, you do have the Orthodox Jews who make sure they follow exactly how they're supposed to be doing it. So that's kind of interesting. Now the name Passover, you probably got that out of the story and probably know this, but of course it got its name from the angel of death passing over the houses of those who were protected by that blood. But Seder actually means order. So literally what we've got here is the Passover order. That's what we're going to be doing tonight. It's actually, this whole thing revolves around the telling of the story of what God did through Moses. So tonight, by touching, tasting, smelling the elements of the Seder table, we'll actually be able to kind of travel back in time in a way to be able to experience exactly what these folks have been doing for 3,500 years. So, getting started. As the Passover season is coming, the most important thing is the preparations. So right after Purim is when they begin to start this process. So for weeks before Passover comes, the houses are thoroughly cleaned to do away with all leaven products. So anything that's got leaven in it, it's got to go. The Lord had commanded for 7 days, including the Passover day, that only the bread that they could eat was unleavened bread to commemorate their hasty departure from Egypt. So the Jewish people actually take several weeks to make sure they clean all that out of their home so that they don't have any problems when the Seder actually comes. On the final day before Passover, the house is meticulously searched for crumbs. It's actually, from my understanding, it's become quite an event. The kids are involved. Let's go find all the crumbs. They sweep up the last bit of crumbs and they burn them before Passover day actually comes and the Seder comes about. So as you can see here, most people actually do have special settings, kind of like how you bring the fine china out when the family comes over for Thanksgiving. It's the same deal. A lot of families actually have Seder special utensils, plates, cups, candles, things like that, that they actually do. The book that they follow, this is called the Haggadah. So I actually have one here. Our thing tonight, this is called the New American Haggadah. I thought that was kind of fitting since we're all in America. This is the one I generally followed for our presentation tonight. Like I said, it does vary based on regions and traditions, but so tonight we're kind of going off the New American Haggadah, but there's some other ones that you can find. What the Haggadah is, it is actually a book where the family just follows it. You open up the Haggadah, and it's actually, if you recall, Hebrew goes from right to left. I actually got a kick out of this book when I first got it. I was like, all right, I'm going to read the Haggadah and open it up. Stop! You're reading it backwards. Oh, shoot. So start on the other side, and you go through, and it basically word for word gives them each blessing, each praise, each prayer, each song to go through, so they make sure they can do it right because it's a long process. Now, what's interesting is when you do a traditional Seder in a Jewish family, so pretend we're all getting together, you're going to be busy for about the next 3 or 4 hours. So I hope you guys didn't have any plans for the rest of the night because, no, I'm kidding. So for tonight, I did whittle out a lot of things. I tried making it bite-sized, basically, for us. I'm not going to go through every single ritualistic prayer and blessing. You can definitely find those, like I said, in any Haggadah. You can come look at mine, borrow it. So we'll be skipping some of the things that are a little repetitive, I guess I'll say. So, with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. So the very first ritual that actually happens on the Seder evening is the candle lighting. Now, this is actually traditionally done by the women of the household. Now, at this point, as they're lighting, they recite praises and blessings, and what the praises and blessings stand for are God's provision. The lights obviously stand for God's light, for God's peace, and they celebrate it for life and freedom. So those candles remain lit throughout the entire Seder, and that is the reminder for that. Provision, his light, his peace, and life and freedom. I'm going to go through and explain in the same order that they do during the Seder. So after they light the candles, the leader of the house will actually go through and explain what we're about to do. So what he does is they start with the first cup of wine and explaining that. There's going to be a total of 4 of them. The first cup is actually going to represent the promise of I am God and I will free you from the slavery of Egypt. Again, at this point, ritual blessings are spoken and they continue on. Now, before they actually get started, just like what we do at home, they actually wash their hands. So I didn't want to have a pitcher of water and everybody splashing each other and we have a water fight tonight. What they typically do, though, is they take a pitcher of water, they have a loose hand, and they actually pour water on it 3 times. Then switch the process and pour water on it 3 times. Now, one interesting thing about this, I couldn't quite find a reason for it, but no recitings of blessings take place during this time. What they move into next is the leader actually standing and the participants go through and explain each element of the Seder so that everybody that's there understands what they're about to do. So there is some repetition on some of these processes, so I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit of them. But everything that's italicized on the screen is right out of this Haggadah. This is what they read. So the leader stands up and says, Maror, a bitter herb such as the horseradish root reminds us of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. As it was written in the Torah, they embittered their lives with hard labor, with mortar and bricks, and with every kind of work in the field. All the work which they made them do was rigorous. The leader then continues on, the zroa, or the lamb shank. It's a roasted lamb shank that reminds us that during the 10th plague, the Jews smeared lamb's blood on their doorposts so that God would pass over their homes and spare their firstborn. This is why the festival is called Pesach. The roasted lamb shank also reminds us of the special lamb that was brought to the temple in Jerusalem on Pesach as an offering to God. Next, we have the betzah, a roasted egg. In ancient days, on the Jewish festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, our ancestors would bring an offering to the temple to be roasted in honor of the holiday. A roasted egg reminds us that sacrifice. The egg is also a symbol of renewal and proclaims hope for future redemption. Then we have the haroset. A mixture of nuts, apples, and sugar reminds us of the mortar used in the great structures built by the Jewish slaves for the Pharaoh in Egypt. Not everybody makes haroset the same way. Sephardi use dates, figs, and nuts. Some Israelis add bananas. But all use it to represent the mortar required of the slaves. Then we have karpas. A green vegetable such as parsley reminds us that the Pesach occurs during the spring, when new life brings a feeling of hope. It is a token of gratitude to God for the products of the earth. Then we have haroset. Romaine lettuce is on the Seder plate because it tastes sweet at first, but then turns bitter. The Jerusalem Talmud compares this to the fact that the Egyptians were kind to the Israelis at first, but later embittered their lives. Mei melach, the salt water. It reminds us of the sad and bitter tears shed by our people when they were slaves, as well as the tears of those not free today. We will dip the karpas, the parsley, in the salt water. The yayin, it is the wine that we drink. At the Seder, as in other Jewish ceremonies, such as the Sabbath, marriages, bar and bat mitzvahs, and the naming of a child, wine is used as a token of festivity. The 4 cups of wine that we drink during the meal reminds us of God's 4 promises for freedom for the Jewish people. I will bring you out, I will deliver you, I will redeem you, and I will take you to be my people. The cup of Elijah is filled with wine and set aside in hopes that the prophet Elijah will visit us during this Seder. The rabbis of long ago taught that Elijah will come and announce a time when all people will be free prior to the Messiah. The matzah. The matzah is perhaps the most recognizable and important symbol of Passover. We eat matzah to remind us how our ancestors had to leave Egypt in such haste that the dough for their bread did not have time to rise. Matzah has holes in it to keep it from rising. Passover matzah is carefully watched from the time the wheat is cut until the matzah is finally baked so that no moisture causes it to become leaven. To make matzah, the dough must be worked for no longer than 18 minutes or the natural process of fermentation or leavening will occur. Matzah is a metaphor for our own lives. It teaches us that if we want to achieve freedom, we cannot just sit back and let nature take its course. Matzah is both the bread of slavery and the bread of freedom. It is the only Passover symbol with two opposing meanings. Having three matzah on the table reminds us that there are three kinds of people: those who are not yet free, those who are free but don't care about the freedom of others, and those who are free and work to help others become free. I'm going to pause there real quick. The three matzahs, depending on where you come from, they all have different reasons as to why they have three matzahs. You'll notice here on the matzah plate that I have, we actually have the three matzahs. This is that unleavened flat bread. Tastes awesome, as you're going to see. The three matzahs, they're, again, depending on where you come from, there's got different ideas. Some groups actually say that it represents the priests, the Levites, and the Jewish people themselves. There's several others, but that was the people being free and not caring about others. That's all from the New American Haggadah. We'll come back to this idea. Now the meal begins. Since they've gone through, the leader has explained what they're about to do and what the meaning is, this is where they actually start the process. So we're going to actually have some of our folks come. They're going to start grabbing plates. They're going to bring that back to you all. If you want to hang on to that, I will actually tell you when we're going to partake of each one of these. I want to make sure I got through everything here. In the New American Haggadah here, I wanted to bring this up as an example. One of the blessings that they do here, I'm not even going to attempt to do it in Hebrew. I will read the English version. But this is an example of one of the blessings that they do. Blessed art thou, eternal, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by thy commandments and has commanded us to kindle the festival lights. That's one blessing. This is during the lighting ceremony that they do. Right after that, they continue and say, Blessed art thou, eternal our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive and well, so we can celebrate this special time. May our home be consecrated, O God, by the light of thy countenance, shining upon us in blessing and bringing us peace. So I wanted to give you an idea as to kind of how they do it. In between a lot of these things, when I mention that they're talking about a blessing, that's along the lines of what they're doing. And usually, what's listed in the Haggadahs is there's going to be several people involved. It's not just the leader that does this. The leader has his specific stuff that he does, but then every participant, they'll actually each have a Haggadah, and they'll go down the row, and the leader will say something, the next person will say a blessing. Blessed art thou, eternal our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. That's one of the ones right before they take the first drink, which we'll actually be doing. What you've got on your plate there is a sampling of everything. And we're going to go through each element. Just so you know, the bone is my answer to not having to buy 400 lambs and chopping them up. Do not eat it. But we will go through every other aspect. That's my answer. Thank you, Amazon. So the leader announces the beginning of the Seder meal. Everybody, as they begin the meal, the one that you've got here is you're going to see you've got the parsley. What they do at this point is everybody in the participation grabs it and they hold it up, and the leader says, "It is time for our first ritual of eating. As we say a blessing and eat a green herb, we remember that it was springtime when Pesach story took place. We dip the greens in our salt water to remind us of the tears of our ancestors who suffered cruel slavery." So, you also have a little jug, what looks like water. It's salt water. So just like what they do in the Passover Seder, go ahead and open up that cap, and what we do is we'll actually dip that parsley into the salt water, and then you eat that. So again, this is to remind us that it's springtime where we have great life, but we also, at the same time, while we're celebrating, want to remember the tears of the ancestors, the tears of the Israelites that suffered cruel slavery in Egypt. So it's pretty neat. How does it all taste? Everything you hoped and dreamed for, right? So that's the parsley. That's one of the bitter herbs that's mentioned. And we'll kind of come back through, because we're going to be slowing down as we kind of experience each element. We'll come back through at the end and kind of go through it again just to make sure it's seared in your brains. After the parsley is the matzah, which you all have, that flat bread. This is what the leader says. "This is the bread of affliction our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come and celebrate the Passover with us. May God redeem us from all trouble and from all servitude. Next year at this season, may the whole house of Israel be free. At this time, we break the middle matzah and put it in a half aside set for the meal, for the afikomen." So, what we've got here is normally these three here are all you got, but I was generous and I bought a big pack so you all could have one. What they do at this point, we've got the three here on the matzah plate. The leader actually takes the middle one out, breaks it in half. The half actually goes back, gets tucked back with the others, and this becomes our afikomen. So we actually have a special bag, which they will have. This is actually put in the bag, zipped up or sealed up, and gets set aside, and we're going to come back to that later on in the meal. But at this point, you can all taste this matzah. As the leader says, "No blessing is said when we break the middle matzah, because it is broken as a symbol of incompleteness. It reminds us of tikkun, all that needs repair in our world. As we celebrate here, we think of Jews everywhere. This year, all the Jews are not fully free. Let us all share with Pesach's hope for freedom. Next year, we shall all be free." So as you're trying that is actual kosher matzah. Thank you again, Amazon. They're all pretty much the same. This is actually made by a Jewish company and imported over. So we've got the real thing here this evening. So the leader continues in an explanation of this afikomen. "After the meal, all share in the afikomen." So this little guy. "Again, there will be no blessing. This will affirm our belief that completeness will come in the future. Sharing afikomen reminds us that not long ago, the special gifts brought to the temple in Jerusalem were shared. No matter where people live, sharing of bread is always a way of saying, 'You are my friend.'" So an interesting also historical tidbit, in the Middle East region where all this is taking place, the bread and wine was a symbol of friendship. It was you're sitting down and you had bread and wine with somebody, that's how you guys were getting along. And that's documented not just in the Jewish culture, but in the general region as well. So, afikomen, we've got set aside. The next steps, and this is one of those processes where there is quite a bit of things said in here. There's some ritualistic prayers, there's things that are happening. This is one of those ways I'm going to save us a little bit of time so we're not here for 4 hours. So that afikomen is slid into that bag and set aside for the children to hide later. So they'll be coming to that period at some point. The second glass of wine is prepared and the children's part begins. That's one thing I failed to give you. That first glass of wine they do at the beginning. So if you want to take your first glass of wine, it is not wine. I could not afford to buy wine for everybody. It is grape juice. Welch's grape juice. Good stuff. So go ahead and take that one. We're going to actually have the ushers will be coming back around here and bringing you your second cup, which you're probably going to need for that matzah anyway. These next steps. The second glass of wine is prepared. So what they do is they have specific times during this Passover Seder where they actually will pour the wine, but they won't touch it. It sits there until the appropriate time. Now at this point, they go into a part where the children sing questions and the adults answer. So I wrote down examples of these questions. There's 4 basic questions. Why is this night different than any other night? So again, all the kids are singing together. This is it's like Christmas carols to them. They know it, they're excited, but it's the way of involving the children, but more specifically, getting answers as to what's special about Passover. Why is this night different? Why do we eat matzah? Why do we eat the bitter herbs, and why do we dip in salt water? So those are some of the questions that are sung. Those are already things we've talked about, so I wasn't going to bore you with going back through the reasoning. But they kind of have the same thing where the adults give back the answer similar to what we had just talked about. Children are heavily involved in the Passover Seder, and the reasoning is that they understand the Torah saying 4 specific times that they need to teach the children about their faith, about their history, and that's why there are these 4 questions. Our ushers are passing out those second cups, so just hang on to them for a second because we are almost there. Now what they move into is what's called the Haggadah, which is that story, same name as the book. This is where they tell the story of the Passover, which is what we did at the beginning. So I won't go through it again, but they do go through the whole Passover story of like what we call as Exodus 12. And they do eventually get to the 10 plagues against the gods of Egypt. The second cup of wine is now sitting before everybody at this point. And as they go through each of the 10 plagues, they actually will dip their finger into their wine, hold it over their plate, and drop a drop of wine onto their plate. The leader during this process actually says, "We have filled our cups to remember the joy of being able to leave Egypt. Yet, our happiness is not complete because the Egyptians, who are also God's children, suffered from the Pharaoh's evil ways. Therefore, we will spill a drop of wine from our cups with a finger as we say each plague." So as they then go through and they recite each plague, they actually tell a brief little description about it. Again, I wasn't going to go through every part of that, but as they're going through each plague, they dip and drop a finger, so that now their wine is not complete because of the suffering of the Egyptian people at the same time. I thought that was kind of neat. The 10 plagues that they retell, and I am not going to butcher these names, therefore I put English in there as well. Number 1, the plague of blood. Number 2, of frogs. Number 3, of lice. Number 4, of beasts. Number 5, of cattle diseases. Number 6, of boils. Number 7, of hail. Number 8, of locusts. And number 9, of darkness. Then comes the one that this whole event is about, which is the slaying of the firstborn. They end this process after they've gone through this whole period. The leader reminds everybody how when Israel reached the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, Pharaoh pursued them with his army, but God parted the waters so the Israelites could pass. But when Pharaoh's army pursued, the Egyptian armies and their horses all drowned. I don't know if any of you have looked into this. They actually have found that land bridge, which is located down there in between the Sinai Peninsula and Arabia, which is where they went into. They went into Arabia to go to Mount Sinai, which is located in Arabia. They have found chariot wheels that match the period of time that actually fits this 3,500 years ago. It's very, very interesting. It's a fun thing to look into. So after reciting of the 10 plagues, they've got their glass of wine, number 2, before them. This is where they take part in the second cup of wine. Again, there are 4 total in the Seder. This is the second one, each representing a promise. This second cup represents the promise of, I will deliver you from their slavery. So at this point, you can go ahead and take the second cup. Again, ritual blessings and praises are spoken over this second cup of wine. So, at this point, they refill their wine glasses again. So again, our ushers are going to go around. They're going to go grab number 3 for y'all. They're getting their exercise tonight. They didn't know there was going to be this much walking when they volunteered. But they refill their wine glasses, and as they do this, they sing a traditional Passover song called Day Nu. I thought about playing it all for you, but it's a little long, and I can't read Hebrew, and it wouldn't have gone over very well. So I broke it all down for you. Thank you, ChatGDP. It recounts being grateful and focuses on the many blessings, but the blessings beyond that of the Exodus of Egypt, beyond the blessings of having the Sabbath, and beyond the blessings of the Torah. So I kind of thought that was interesting. As big of deals as the Exodus is, the Sabbath is, and the Torah, the song Day Nu actually represents how much more they are blessed beyond that point. So I kind of thought that was kind of neat. Now they do have another hand washing at this point. In modern Seder, this is where they actually wash their hands. This is actually usually done with a towelette, so they actually do get washed up because the big part's actually coming up. They hold the matzah again as they recite blessings. So they don't eat it, but they hold the pieces of it, and they recite more of these blessings, these praises to God. The next item on the list is the meror and the haraset. So, now the meror is that horseradish. That's that yellow goop on your plate. You will do it. The explanation, they dipped the meror into the haraset to recall that the Israelites were able to withstand the bitterness of slavery because it was sweetened by the hopes of freedom. After this, they recite more blessings. So, the haraset, that's the yummy-looking apple stuff that my wife made for y'all. The horseradish is the white stuff. I provided little spoons to make life easy, but what you want to do is you are supposed to eat those together for that exact reason. They withstand the bitterness of slavery because it was sweetened by the hopes of freedom. So go ahead and try that if you dare. It is interesting, it's when you're participating in these things, understanding the meanings behind them and why we've got these seemingly oxymoron items together, I guess you could say. They actually continue to eat these bitter herbs. After that, they actually, and I wasn't going to make you do this, but they take, their pieces of matzah, they actually each have 4 pieces. They take 2 pieces of it now, and they actually make a sandwich of the matzah, the bitter herb, and the haroset. So they put all 3 of those together and make a yummy sandwich, which you can take to work with you tomorrow. This is to signify that the matzah of freedom and the meror and haraset of slavery together signify that the people that are not free will always have the hope of freedom. So that's an interesting thing. I believe that was during the medieval times that was actually pulled together and became a thing. So that's the meror and the haraset. Again, blessings are spoken, prayers are made, praises are made. We come to the next item. We'll do this quick so you can get the taste out of your mouth. The baitza, the roasted egg. Now, traditionally, I thought this was interesting. The firstborn Seder participants share in this together. It's kind of their thing, which obviously signifies the protection of the firstborn. Go ahead and eat your baitza, your roasted egg. This is to signify spring and renewal, and to honor, I like this, to honor the Jewish midwives who refused to carry out Pharaoh's order to kill the male babies, protecting the Jewish baby's survival. So if y'all recall where Moses came from, as a baby, the Pharaoh had said, hey, there's getting too many of these people, this is not good, go kill all the male babies. We're going to slow this process down. The Jewish midwives actually did a good job of trying to hide them, protect them. And of course, we all know the story of Moses, where as a baby he was put into an ark and thrown into, well, probably not thrown, but carefully set into the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter found him, and the rest is history, of course. Interestingly enough, there actually has been some written evidence of what appears to be Moses in the royal household at this time. I was actually I ran into that during this study as well. So the boiled egg. Now we come to the fun part. At this point, the rest of the normal meal begins. So this is the ceremonial side of the Seder. They still have a nice grand feast. So now is when they start eating all their fun stuff. And sorry, I forgot to swing by McDonald's, so this is all you get. But during the meal, at some point, remember, we've got this afikomen. It was set here on the table. Adults pretend like they're not paying attention, and the children actually come, grab it, they steal it, they run, and they hide it. This is the traditional dessert. So the matzah, which has now become this afikomen, it's a totally different thing now. It's not matzah anymore, it's afikomen. It's their dessert at the end of the meal, so since we really need it and the kids have hidden it, the adults actually have to bargain for it. So this is where the kids tend to get some prizes or some cash out of the deal. It's kind of fun to look at some of the videos of them doing this and the kids excited about this all. After the meal has completed, their normal meal, the afikomen is broken up amongst everybody. Remember, it's just a half. So right here, this is how much everybody gets to share. But again, this is all symbolic. This is ceremonial. They all share in that together for dessert. Then comes, so if you have any afikomen on your plate, go ahead and eat that if you'd like. And then go ahead and wash it down with our third cup of wine. Do you want to come hide it? Okay, come hide it. My niece is going to do us the honor of being the one that goes and hides the afikomen. After the afikomen is go ahead and hide it. After the afikomen is eaten as dessert, we move on to our third cup of wine. Again, 4 total in the Seder, each representing a promise. The third cup represents the promise, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And again, ritual blessings are spoken, prayers and praises are made. So go ahead and take your third cup if you'd like, representing that I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. At this time, our ushers are going to rise again and bring you our fourth and final cup. So we're almost there, I promise. Almost there. But this is I like this part of it. I found this very fascinating. They've got, each household will actually have a special cup set aside. This cup is actually known as the cup of Elijah. So at this time, the leader would actually take the wine and actually fill this cup to the brim and set it aside. This cup is actually set aside for Elijah. They recount how they await for his arrival. And actually at this point, and this one's kind of evolved and changed over the years, but the kids actually run to the front door and open it up. Now, from my understanding is in the earlier days, during this entire process, the door would remain open. However, now we have Chicago, Los Angeles, New York. We don't leave our doors open anymore. So what they'll typically do is they'll ritualistically, during this procedure of the cup of Elijah, the kids will run and open up the door. They actually come back. They recite a couple of blessings and requests, prayers, if you will, to Elijah to come and usher in the time of the Messiah. Then the kids run back and shut and lock the door so we can continue. I did also find it interesting that some actually set out an empty chair during this entire process in front of the cup of Elijah for Elijah. So should he show up and walk in our open door and come and sit down with us and enjoy the Seder like we pray for and hope for every year, we're all ready. So I thought that was kind of interesting, having an empty chair for him. So, since we got through the cup of Elijah, the leader now announces the conclusion of the Seder. They go through again and they kind of recount everything. So the way of teaching, this is from my understanding, is you tell the people what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, Then you tell them what you told them. That's how you learn. So this is exactly how the Passover Seder leader does as well. So they recount everything. So again, to not keep us here for hours, I decided to not go through everything again. But they understand fully, by the time this is done, why they've done this. Now, what's interesting in addition to this is at this point, they actually talk about historical things that have happened on Passover throughout the Jewish people's history. I didn't want to list them all, but they kind of do this in the kind of blessings, prayers portion. A couple of examples is the belief that God was made known to Abraham on the 14th of Nisan, or the future day of Passover. So this is when Abraham or Abram at the time would have been in the Ur of the Chaldees, and God called him on the 14th of Nisan. They believe that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed on Passover. They believe that both Jericho and Midian fell on Passover. And they also believe, and I like this one because anyone that knows me knows my favorite book is the book of Daniel that has to do with Babylon. But they also believe the hand wrote on the banquet wall in the halls of Belshazzar on Babylon, or on Passover there in Babylon. So that's a couple of the interesting things. So they recount what we did. Here's some of the things that have happened on Passover. Then we come to our final cup of wine, the fourth of the Seder. This fourth cup is the redemption cup. It represents the promise, and I will take you to be my people. So this is the last promise of God during this event of you are going to be redeemed. You are now mine. So go ahead and take our fourth cup here together. So after they have taken the fourth cup, it kind of varies. There's a lot of ending rituals, I guess you could say. One of the biggest one is they sing together. They'll sing a hymn. There's actually one listed in the New American Haggadah. Each Haggadah might have a different one. The historical big one that everybody would do, kind of like our Joy to the World or Silent Night, would be the Halal Psalms, which is Psalm 113 through 118. So if y'all get your Bibles out, we're going to read. No, I'm just kidding. We'll sing that. But that's what they do. So they've got those 5 chapters there that they actually sing through. They will also recite blessings. They also remind the attendees of the Passover Seder that God has blessed them and to remember the Passover. Now, one thing that, from my understanding and all the digging and all the various rituals that I was looking into, every single one of them end with next year in Jerusalem. I thought that was kind of interesting. It makes sense to me prior to 1948 because they were, wishing for, hey, I wish we could do this in Jerusalem like we're supposed to, like we're commanded to. They were looking forward to the reinstitution of having a sovereign state of Israel. But as we all know, in May of 1948, that happened. The best reasonings I could come up with, it kind of depends on the region and who's doing it. Are you secular? Are you religious? What's your reasoning behind saying next year in Jerusalem? The full restoration of Jerusalem. They also lament over the division of Jerusalem yet. So as you know, yes, Israel's a nation, but Jerusalem is divided. We've got different quarters that are run by different groups, different religious groups. We all know the Muslims actually have the Temple of Mount. They've got their own quarter. It's kind of a mess yet. So they're looking forward to the day when they get to have their whole land back. It is also, in some groups, a reminder that every Jew should make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So if you haven't done it yet, hey, next year in Jerusalem, hey, let's do this. This will be awesome. Make a pilgrimage. For the religious Jews, a lot of the times it's hope for the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. So that's a big deal. Obviously, there's a Temple Institute, which is an organization that's gearing towards doing that. So we'll see how things shake out in the future. It's very interesting. So that is the conclusion of a modern-day Seder. You've got to experience each one of the things, some great, some maybe not so great, but that's how they go about it. So this is where it's now ended. So the family goes about their business, but this has been about 3 to 4 hours. Now, for the sake of being complete here, I wanted to answer a couple of questions. This was kind of the big things I ran into when I was researching this as questions. What do people have questions about? Was the Last Supper a Passover Seder? So as we know,
I have a question.
yes.
Why haven't we eaten the lettuce
Oh, did we skip that one? Did we skip a... Oh, man. That was our bitter herbs one. I skipped past that.
Was it with the horseradish?
It was... I did. Did I tell you to do the parsley again? Did you mess up, Elsie? The harset. That one we didn't touch? That was our harset. Did I not put that in here? I skipped it. Boy. Forget it. I'll go home. I have no idea what I'm talking about. No, let's see. That one is supposed to take place right after our kappas. Shoot, go ahead and eat it. This is probably one of those things where you've stared at something so many times, can't see it anymore. Yeah, I think I totally skipped that part. I went through the explanation. But yeah, that one is part of the bitter herbs. And this is the one, let me just go back to that slide. I do have it up. This is that one that actually is supposed to remind them of the bitterness. So it's supposed to be sweet at first and kind of turn bitter in your mouth or dull for the fact that they had hard labor. But the bitterness or the looking forward to freedom was sweet. That's what that one was. Sorry about that. Good catch. I'll give you that one. The common questions before we get out of here tonight. Was the Last Supper a Passover Seder? When you look at the Last Supper that's covered in the New Testament, we've got cups of wine. There's several of them. We've got unleavened bread. We've got the ritual washing, which is where Jesus actually washed their feet. So we kind of took that to the next level. Jesus gave thanks for each element, which would be the portion of the blessings. There was also dipping. There's a specific time mentioned in the Gospels where there was dipping, which would have been the maror into the bitter herbs. Then it also does record that they sang that Hallel, the hymn, before they went out to the Garden of Eden. The Gospel tells us of 2 cups specifically that were done, but we do know from records that the 4 cups was in place and being used prior to Jesus' time here on earth. So it's likely that he did do all 4 cups. I'll talk about that in just a second here too. But it's interesting. Is there more? So we kind of understand that Jesus kind of had a little bit about this. If you remember on one of those first verses, this blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. This is where they put the blood on the doorposts. Did you catch that first part? Because I've never caught this before till I was doing this study. The blood shall be a sign for who? For you. It's for the people. I always kind of assume, okay, the blood got put on. It's the sign so the death angel goes away. Well, it told the death angel not come, but the sign wasn't for the angel. The angel knew the hearts of the people, the angel of God. This was for the people. This was for their faith. So I kind of thought that was interesting. I had never caught that before. It's very, very specific. So it's just another one of those instances to, when you're going through the Bible, to take it very seriously. Mark 14:22. So this is the event we just talked about, Jesus and the Passover. While they were eating, he took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it, which we experienced tonight. He broke it, and he said, "Take, this is my body." That's kind of interesting. We went through what the Jewish mind, what they still do today, what the matzah was all for, which it definitely is. However, Jesus is putting a whole new meaning on this tonight. He says, "Take it, this is my body." So he's instituting this matzah is actually representative of me. So one thing, if you noticed, the matzah, a couple things about it. One, you might be able to see, you might not, it actually is striped. There's actually stripes that run through it. There's also holes running through it, which is very important. The other big thing about it is matzah has no leaven. Now, all throughout the Torah, the Jewish scriptures, those first few books of what we call the Old Testament, it talks about how leaven represents sin. Of course, we're all sinners, we know that. But there's no sin in the matzah. Jesus just said the matzah represents him. Jesus had no sin. He was guilty of no sin. So that's kind of the fulfillment. He's putting a whole new meaning on this. We talked about these stripes. Isaiah 53 verse 3 says, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and by his wounds we are healed." So it actually references right into that. Let's see here. The Messianic Jews, from my understanding, and more of the Christians actually look at the three matzah actually representing God, the Son, or Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. So remember we had these three, and it was really interesting how we didn't take the top one. Woo! We didn't take the top one. We didn't break the top one. Which one did we take? We took the middle one. Why the middle one? Nobody knows. But when it represents the Trinity, God, the Son, the Holy Ghost, why did we take the middle one? Because it represents Jesus. What happened to Jesus? He was broken, he was striped, he had holes put in him. I thought that was something else when I realized that. If that's one thing, he goes on to the next. When he had taken the cup, he gave thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is being poured out for many." So just like what he did with the bread, he now put a whole different meaning to the cup, to this wine. He explains that it represents his blood. At the Last Supper, this is likely the third cup where he says, "This is my blood of the new covenant." And this is recorded in Mark 14, 22, and 23. But before the last cup, so remember that fourth cup that we just did, apparently before that last cup, he doesn't take it. Everybody else takes it. He says he would not drink it again until the everlasting kingdom is established. And that's in Mark 14:25, which when it's established is after the marriage supper of the Lamb. Revelation 19:19. I thought that was something else. So if we got all that out of it, what else can we get out of it? Of course, ritualistically, the maror, the bitter herbs, remind us of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. Jesus' fulfillment of this is Jesus tasted the bitterness of sin, suffering, and death. Again, Isaiah 53, verse 3 says, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." Jesus bore the full weight of humanity's suffering and separation for God, which is why Matthew 27:46 records Jesus saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" For us, it can be a reminder of bitterness of living in sin. What about the candles? This initiates the Seder. It's traditionally done by a woman, and I did not think of this before, but Jesus Christ came through a woman, specifically attributed in Genesis 3:15, where God said, "I will put enmity between you," that's Satan, "and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." And then more specifically, of course, Jesus came through the Virgin Mary. Through Mary. That's the biggest deal. He had no earthly father. He had an adoptive stepfather, but he came through Mary, according to Isaiah 7:14 and Matthew 1:18 and 20. Isaiah 7:14 was the prophecy of this happening, where it said, "A virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. How about the empty chair in the cup for Elijah? This is one of my favorite parts. This actually represents John the Baptist. We all know about that crazy guy coming out. If you haven't read about him, he is a character. But Jesus actually affirmed that John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, and that's in Matthew 11:14, where Jesus said, "And if you are willing to accept it, John himself is Elijah who was to come." So basically what he's saying is, hey, if you guys had accepted it, it's all done. We got it. We did it. I was the awaited Messiah. The Haggadah, the telling of the Passover story. Of course, in the Seder, we did it to understand what this all came from. But in Luke 24:27, it says, "Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained," that's Jesus, "what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself." Now, this is after the resurrection. This is when two disciples are heading off down the road to Emmaus, kind of bummed out that Jesus is dead. All of a sudden, they don't recognize him, but he shows up. He starts giving them a Bible lesson about he being in the Old Testament, which is very interesting. Matthew 5:17 to 18 as well. Jesus said, "Do not presume that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Remember, this is part of the law. This is what God commanded them to do. Jesus came to fulfill that. For truly I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. So if you want to read that in English, say not the crossing of the T or the dotting of the I will pass until all is fulfilled. How about the egg? They used it to mourn the destruction of the temple. Jesus actually became that final sacrifice, ending the need for the temple sacrifices. According to Hebrews 10:10-12, by this will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all time. It's a one-time deal. It doesn't need to happen again. Every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But, verse 12, he having offered one sacrifice for sins of all time sat down at the right hand of God. His resurrection signifies this new life and the hope beyond the morning, just like the egg. How about some more? I didn't want to go through too much, but he's represented as the Passover lamb. John 1:29, the next day, that's John the Baptist, saw Jesus coming to him and said, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus became the lamb slaughtered on Passover. 1 Corinthians 5:7, out of the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened, for Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. The blood on the doorposts, Romans 5:9 says, much more than now having been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. So just like the Israelites were protected, or anyone really, I don't know if you caught that, but in the Exodus 12 story, it wasn't just the Israelites that were protected. If an Egyptian did that on their blood post, they would be protected as well. If an Israelite did not do it, they would lose their firstborn. No bones were broken. Now remember, the Passover lamb had to be perfect. You could not break its bone. That is in the law. John 19:33. But after they came to Jesus, this is after the crucifixion, when they saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. We're going to talk a little bit about this next Friday, on Good Friday. I'm going to be going over the crucifixion and what happened that night. So if you're all available, come on back, because we're kind of going to go through the science of that. The afikomen broken, hidden away, and ransomed. 1 Peter 1:18-19, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited by your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. That verse also talks about how he was found spotless, and that actually happened legally. Luke 23:14-15, this is Pilate speaking. Now this is the ruler, the right-hand guy, if you will, the governor, saying, after examining him, Jesus, before you, behold, I find this man guilty of none of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. He was found spotless. And this, remember we talked about twilight. Why did I bring all that up? His crucifixion time was the time of the evening sacrifice. In Matthew 27:46 and verse 50, that's where we read that verse earlier, but about the 9th hour specifically, that's 3 p.m., Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? In verse 50, and Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. He died at the exact time that the sacrifice was taken care of. So the conclusion, before we take off here tonight, when Jesus Christ becomes your Passover lamb and you are covered and protected by his blood, death has no power over you. You are declared righteous. Now, remember that one detail we talked about. I thought this one was kind of cool. And again, I'd read it, never caught it before, but remember the detail that they had to be fully clothed, sandals on, staff in hand, ready to roll. Why? Why was that? I'll come back to that. The conclusion. Jesus was and is the Messiah. We just talked about how Jesus fulfilled every aspect of not just the ancient Seder, the original one that God established, but even all the elements that have been added since, even by those that don't believe that Jesus was a Messiah, points to Jesus. In 1963, Professor Peter Stoner at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California, did extensive research on the mathematical probabilities, or the odds, of various numbers of Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah applying to Jesus of Nazareth. This is a mathematician. This is a tenured professor. Upon completing his research, he submitted the figures for review to a committee of the American Scientific Affiliation. Upon examination, they verified that all of his calculations were dependable and accurate in regard to the scientific material presented. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to say, what's the chances? We all like to know the chances. We live everything in our lives based off of what's the chances. Here's the 8 things. He took a look at 8 prophecies. These are pretty easy ones too. The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. A messenger will prepare the way for the Messiah, that Elijah guy. The Messiah will enter Jerusalem as a king riding on a donkey. The Messiah will be betrayed by a friend and suffer wounds in his hands. The Messiah will be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. The betrayed money will be used to purchase a potter's field. The Messiah will remain silent while he's afflicted, even though he's not innocent and not guilty. The Messiah will die by having his hands and feet pierced. So there's all the references where those prophecies take place. So what Peter Stoner did is, by multiplying all these probabilities together, produced a number. Now this is rounded off, but 1 in 10 to the 28th power chances. Got that? Y'all know what that means, right? Basically, what you have to do, though, is you can't just say that. You also have to take the estimated amount of people that have ever lived. So what's the chances that somebody could fulfill these 8? He estimated 88 billion people have lived all throughout history, and produces a probability of all 8 prophecies being fulfilled in the life of a single person. That probability now becomes 1 in 10th to the 17th power. That is 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's the number. 17 zeros after it. That's the chances. He took it one step further. Did you know that there's 300 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in the Old Testament when he was on this earth the first time? 300. If you increase that number to 48, that now becomes 1 in 10 to the 157th power. Can't even wrap your mind around that. 157 zeros after it. One chance in somebody doing that. Modern mathematicians have proved that anything beyond 1 in 10 to the 15th, 1 to 10 with 15 zeros after it, is mathematically impossible. That's proof positive that I can actually be more certain that Jesus Christ was the Messiah of Israel than I can actually be of my own name, and I can prove that mathematically. He fulfilled everything he said he would thus far, and because of that, I can be certain that he will keep his promises in the future. The next item of business for the future is what's called the harpazo. And I won't go into that tonight, but we all know that as the rapture. So remember, I talked about how they had to have their clothes on, sandals tied, staff ready. They had to be ready to leave, just like we all need to be ready to leave as well. So that gave us the Seder, the origins, the evolution, what it actually is, and the meaning behind it all. Hope you all learned something. If you have any questions, come grab me. Again, if you want to borrow or check out the Haggadah, please do. But I will close us off tonight with Lech Shalom, go in peace. Thank you, everybody.